Okay, let's go ahead and kick things off. Once again, thank you everyone so much for attending. Today's educational webinar is going to be MDM for Data Warehousing, brought to you by Data Source Consulting and EXL Company. So thank you so much for joining us. We're big believers in helping educate the community about things that we're learning from the trenches. So our guest speaker today is going to be Bryson, and I'll be introducing him here shortly. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Data Source Consulting and why we even know about this topic. So we are a boutique consulting firm. That's how you can think of us. And we've got a pure play in enterprise data management, modern data warehouse architectures, and decision intelligence. And about a year and a half ago, we were acquired by EXL Services as part of their analytics arm. So we are very excited that now we can add the whole plethora of services around enterprise data management and advanced analytics. So now that includes predictive modeling, advanced analytics, machine learning, and robotics. So very excited to have that expansion. And how we deliver our services is we kind of divide those into two categories. We've got strategic work, where we're doing data governance or vendor tool evaluations, establishing programs, vendor tool evaluations. Here lately, we've had a big spurt in data virtualization, which was interesting because 4 years ago, that was really popular. So we're seeing another spike there. And then we've got the doers, the actual engineers and the architects that do the work. They, lock arms with internal teams to help deliver on some of the recommendations that we make through our strategy work. So that includes architecture and cloud and BI and decision intelligence and data quality, and obviously master data management. So with that segue, let me introduce your guest speaker today. It's going to be Bryson Dunn. He is our competency director for master data management. And I've listened to this presentation a couple of times. Bryson gets asked a lot of times to come into our enterprise accounts and help educate them on master data management, how to approach it, what to think about, as well as a number of user groups. So he's in high demand on the speaking circuit. He's very passionate about what he does, very customer-centric. His past experience has included business development manager, solutions architect, a full stack developer, and he really likes to approach problems and solutions with a holistic and a very pragmatic approach, which I think a lot of our clients find refreshing. In addition to that, as our competency director, he's responsible for, I think we have 3 MDM teams that he oversees, so he's got a lot on his plate, so we're really excited that he was able to carve out some time today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bryson.
Thanks, Deborah. Really excited to be speaking to this audience today about MDM and data warehousing and how they interplay together. But to start, I wanted to give an overview of MDM to kind of put the conversation in context. So for those who aren't aware, just to bring everybody on the same playing field here. So master data, first of all, it's the entities that are critical to the business of an organization. So these could be customers or products or suppliers. What master data is not is transactional. So these are not sales orders, these are not weblogs. Typically, master data is well managed within an organization, but it might be siloed or fragmented across operational systems. So effectively managing master data is about bringing that data into a central location, making it consistent and uniform, and make sure that that data is consistently managed. As I mentioned earlier, the primary challenge that master data management tries to solve is to bring in different formats and structures and often different pictures or versions of the truth of master data into a central location and produce a single version of that truth that can be reused and leveraged across the IT landscape. So that's master data and a little bit about master data management. But I think the most important piece of this slide that I like to emphasize is that master data management is not just technology, it's a discipline. It's a technology-enabled discipline. And, you know, I think oftentimes when people think of MDM, they immediately jump to the wonderful tools that vendors have brought to market to make implementing MDM solutions much easier. And technology is certainly an important piece of the equation, but equally as important, if not more important, is the collaboration with business and between business and IT to make sure that that data is well managed and governed. The people in the process are critical to the success of master data management programs. So that's a little bit about MDM. Continuing on kind of this foundational knowledge of what MDM is, which will, I think, make our discussion about data warehousing a little bit more informative, is a quick overview of a really common term in the MDM space. It's a golden record, and many of you may have heard this term being thrown around. So I wanted to do a brief overview of what a golden record really is, because it's going to be very, very important to how MDM adds value to a data warehouse implementation. So there are 3 steps to making a golden record. The first step is having source data. So as we mentioned in the previous slide, you know, your master data may be scattered across the enterprise. In this case, we have a record coming from an ERP system and one coming from a CRM system, Salesforce. And you can see that each system has a slightly different view of me, right, as an individual. My full name is Kerry Bryson Dunn, and so the ERP system may think that my name is Kerry Dunn, and Salesforce recognizes me as Bryson Dunn. So the first step in producing a single version of the truth is having the contributing data that you need to produce that, of course, with identifiers that link them back to their original sources. Now, the second step is broken down into 3 sub-steps, I'll call them. The first is that you need to identify that these 2 records, source records, are the same person. And a number of MDM tools will have different approaches to accomplishing that. There are proprietary and open source algorithms that will enable you to identify that 2 records or rows are the same person. And often that includes some fuzzy logic, phonetic matching, and again, some proprietary algorithms that some vendors will bring to bear. But however you do it, you need to somehow identify that 1 or more records are the same person. That's a process called matching. The second step is that, as you can see in these source records, we have a little bit of conflicting information about me as an individual. And so to produce a single version of the truth, you need to somehow reconcile multiple, perhaps disparate and conflicting versions of the truth to produce the best version of the truth. And that's a process that's often referred to as survivorship. And again, vendor tools will have different approaches to how this is accomplished, but at the end of the day, the goal is to select the best of breed attributes from all of your contributing source systems. So again, that process is called survivorship. And then lastly, in this process, which I refer to as consolidation as a whole, this process of matching, surviving, and merging, the last step is to merge the records into that persisted golden record at the top. And you can see that we've basically stored the single version of the truth that we're mastering, and we've assigned it an identifier that we can use to globally and uniquely identify that entity, this individual, across the IT landscape. So that process is called consolidation. And then lastly, and I think very importantly, and it's sometimes overlooked when we have discussions about MDM, is that we have this automated process, automated to the extent that it can be, process of producing golden records that we just discussed in the first 2 steps. However, on an operational basis, as you do business with an individual, me in this example, you might come to discover that Bryson B. Dunn is not entirely correct as the name. And so you need a process to manually maintain that data on an ongoing basis to ensure that it's accurate and well governed. So obviously the correct data here would be Carrie Bryson Dunn. So the last and I think a crucial piece to what makes a golden record is a data stewardship process to maintain that data. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of context around what MDM is, what kind of the output of MDM is at a very foundational level, I did also want to do a quick overview of the different MDM implementation styles that exist. There are 4 of them, and again, I think this is going to be useful to kind of give a quick overview of the whole spectrum of MDM, from very simple to more complex, and where the data warehousing implementation style kind of fits into that spectrum. So the first implementation style is called registry, and basically what a registry solution is that you ingest records from source systems, usually just the attributes that you need to match the records together, or tokens that represent those attributes, and you match them and you produce cross-references. And these systems are typically very high performance and efficient, and do not store a persisted golden record that we just reviewed. And that kind of feature is unique to this implementation style. But what these systems are really good at is identifying which records across large amounts of operational systems and very high volumes of data, hundreds of millions of records, are the same. So that's the registry implementation style. The second style, and I'll briefly mention that the next 3 are kind of iterations or evolutions of the same style in a sense. The second style is consolidation, and you might hear this being referred to as analytical, which is more of a usage style. But a consolidation style hub is probably what you most often think of when you think of master data management. It's where your operational systems will continue to manage master data, customers, products, suppliers, on an ongoing basis. And that data will be ingested by MDM and consolidated, and golden records will be produced through the process we just reviewed. And then that data, that single version of the truth that exists within the MDM system, is fed to data warehouses or other BI or analytic platforms. And so, as you might imagine, this is the style that we'll focus on today. And one of the key things that kind of distinguishes this style is that MDM is really there as a system of reference for downstream systems. Its role as a system of record is really not existent in this implementation style. So moving on, as I mentioned, the next 2 styles are can be kind of viewed as evolutions of the consolidation style. And so the next style, coexistence, what really defines this style is that data that you've mastered in the MDM hub is published back to operational systems. And this can be highly valuable to an organization because you've produced this single version of the truth in MDM. You've made that available to your data warehouse and to your reports through the data warehouse in the consolidation style. But it's often very valuable to make that data available to the business users who interact with the applications that they use on a day in and day out basis, like Salesforce or like SAP or Microsoft Dynamics, whatever that may be. But making that high quality master data available to the people who interface with the customers or products as a part of their daily duties. Also with this style, at the MDM hub, it typically transitions to becoming more of a system of record for certain data elements, system of reference versus system of record, what that really means is describing where the data is maintained. And so, with the coexistence style, certain attributes or data elements, instead of being maintained in the sources, may be maintained within MDM directly. MDM might support some operational business processes in this type of style, but typically those are fairly limited, and integration is typically done in batch. Okay, so the last usage style is called centralized. You might hear this referred to as operational or transactional, but again, it's another evolution of the coexistence style, and MDM is starting to become, to a larger extent, the system of record for more and more data elements. And it will typically support a larger number of business processes. For example, the MDM hub might be a crucial component or piece of the supporting infrastructure that's needed to, say, support the supplier or vendor approval process, or is a piece of the order fulfillment process. And what that means is that in order for the business to do business operationally, MDM must be live, and the data must flow through MDM, typically in a real-time, on a real-time basis, right? So the data availability becomes much more critical, system availability becomes much more critical, and so obviously that comes with a lot of complexity, and these types of implementations can be quite complex and take quite a while to implement. So that's an overview of the MDM implementation styles. Again, just to put it into context, today we're going to be focusing in on the consolidation style, but some of the questions that you might ask yourself when you decide, what type of implementation style should we pursue, and these are the types of questions that we work our customers through, are, do we need MDM to be a system of record, a system of reference, or a combination of the two? What types of operational systems or business processes does it need to support? Are there analytical use cases that MDM is going to support? Where does the data need to flow? How quickly and at what latency does it need to flow? And what types of interfaces need to be made available? Is it just for data stewards who are maintaining the data on the back end? Are there kind of tailored user interfaces that need to be made available to people who manage this data as a part of their job? Those are some of the decisions that need to be made as a part of an MDM implementation, and will guide your decision as to which implementation style is needed. All right, so that was a hopefully not too technical or in-depth of an overview of MDM, but now we really want to focus in on MDM for data warehousing, really dialing in on that consolidation style of MDM. So first, let's talk about some of the benefits. A consolidation style MDM hub, as we've been discussing, it provides a central source of clean, standardized, consolidated master data. It provides that single version of the truth for your customers, for your products, for your reference data, whatever you're mastering. A consolidation style hub is typically fairly low cost and quick to implement, and the reason for that is because there's a minimal impact to your existing architecture. You can stand up an MDM hub, read data from your operational systems, consolidate it, and it really doesn't impact, to a large extent, any of the existing infrastructure that's in place. And that said, it can be highly valuable to the business, particularly when you feed that data to the data warehouse and you have the ability to drive insights across lines of business, segments, or subsidiaries. and a good example of that might be a bank where they have a wealth management department and they have a commercial banking line of business, and they each use different CRM or ERP platforms. And they have no way to identify maybe the same customer that they're working with and correlate that data and have that 360-degree view of how they interact with that individual or organization as a company. So that MDM solutions will enable that kind of 360-degree view and enable you to correlate operational and transactional data across these different operational systems that support your business operations. And as we've been mentioning, it acts as a system of reference for these operational applications. Again, in the consolidation style, we typically don't publish back to the source systems, but often a pattern that's followed with these implementations is the implementation of a search before create feature or capability. And essentially what that is it leverages that high quality master data to prevent the entry of duplicate or low quality data in your operational applications, again, by searching that, that central single source of the truth in the MDM hub. So those are some of the benefits of the consolidation style. So in order to understand how MDM and data warehousing support one another and how they interact, you need to know a little bit about data warehousing. And so what this slide shows is a pretty standard 3-layer data warehouse architecture where you have your sources on the left-hand side, and you have an acquisition, integration, and presentation layer of the warehouse. Acquisition is where you basically ingest the data. It's typically stored in a format that mirrors the source systems. And then the integration layer is where a lot of magic happens. This is where you can form the data to a standard model, often referred to as a 3NF or third normal form model. The data is cleansed, and surrogate keys are defined, and scalability is often a key consideration at this layer. But also very interesting at this layer is that data warehouses without an MDM capability to support them will attempt to do some of the mastering within this layer. And often the business will say, well, yeah, I need to correlate the data from system A to system B in order to get this report or this insight out of the warehouse, out of my reports and my analytics. And so oftentimes what we see is that in this integration layer, there will be hard-coded match logic, or there will be spreadsheets that are maintained by a customer where they will say, they'll basically link all of the records across the sources and identify them as being the same person, for example, or company, manually. And they'll give that to the data integration team and say, here's the mapping, make sure that these are all correlated and the reports roll up the way that they've been defined in the Excel spreadsheet. And so clearly that is a little bit of a technical process. In order to make changes to that, what we often find is that it requires a full, develop, test, and deploy cycle to affect changes in those reports. So it's relatively slow moving, and it requires pretty heavy IT involvement to make those changes. And then lastly, you have your presentation layer, and these are your star and snowflake schemas, highly optimized for reporting and BI tools. But really what we want to focus in on today is how MDM can reduce complexity in the integration layer by taking on a lot of that responsibility and that manual matching effort. So this slide kind of shows where the two worlds of MDM and data warehousing kind of overlap and they meet. Some of the common terms that you'll hear in the MDM world are golden records and global identifiers. we're kind of familiar with what those are from the overview earlier. And what you'll hear often in the data warehousing world are terms like conform dimension and durable key, which really are very similar concepts. A conform dimension is a dimension where you're consolidating data from multiple sources in a consistent format, and a durable key is a way that you link multiple records from the various sources together and can be likened to a global ID. So very similar concepts, and I think it's pretty interesting to see the overlap there. So how do you properly leverage an MDM solution, and what does a data warehouse bring to the table? Obviously, they're two very similar, different solutions. So you want to make sure that each does what it does best. And as we've been discussing, the whole goal of implementing MDM to support a warehouse is to essentially reduce complexity in the integration layer by separating concerns. MDM can provide a trusted source of master data, and typically that is fed to your dimensions. It's your dimensional data that you source from MDM. And then you use your data warehouse to aggregate, conform, and correlate transactional data to those mastered dimensions. So each does what it does best. And I think the most powerful piece of having an MDM solution integrated with a warehouse is that you empower the business to manage their data directly. You expose a stewardship interface where if a report isn't quite rolling up correctly due to the way that that master data is currently linked or merged, then they are empowered to make that change directly, and it impacts their reports without any IT involvement, right? So that means that there's less warehouse maintenance, and the business has the direct accountability and responsibility to maintain that data, which in the end fosters a better collaboration and partnership between the business and IT. So that's a little bit of how the two interact. So to get a little bit technical here, I did want to present some common approaches to how we model mastered dimensions, and there are two. Each has its own pros and cons, but the first is to use a self-referencing dimension, as you might call it. As you can see, we've got our durable key here, and that's really where that comes into play. That might be your global identifier from the MDM hub that links, in this case, 3 source records or 2 source records based on what has been matched in the MDM hub. And what you can see here is that the durable key is actually a surrogate key in this example, and you can see that the global identifier is actually stored on the third row identified as the MDM system. So you pull in that golden record as a distinct record in your dimension, and you also have the original source values from your source systems. And this is a pretty elegant and efficient way to model your mastered dimensions, but it may be a little bit more difficult to modify your existing integration logic and mappings to accommodate it. So this is one approach. And then the second approach, very briefly, would be to create a standalone master data dimension that's apparent to your existing dimensions. So all that is needed here would be the addition of a foreign key in your existing dimensions, which makes it much easier to retrofit. There's no need to conform to your existing dimension tables. All right, so before we get on, to wrap this up, we're going to discuss a few of the recommendations and recipes for successful implementation of MDM. But before we do, I did want to present a reference architecture for MDM and how the end-to-end data flow looks when a data warehouse is in the picture. So on the left, you have your internal sources and potentially some third-party sources like DNV or Axiom or IMS, whatever those sources may be. You ingest that data into an integration and data quality layer. Cleansing and standardizing data is very important to a successful MDM implementation. And you feed that master data into the MDM hub where it's consolidated. It goes through that match, merge, survivorship process in the MDM hub. And there's often a data stewardship component to that and interface, and that's where your data stewards will manage the data, the master data. And then on the output of the MDM, you have your data warehouse integration layer, where master data is pulled from your MDM hub, and you also pull transactional data from your sources. And that data is all consolidated and fed into your data warehouse, that three-layer architecture that eventually feeds your reporting and analytics. And in practice, you'll see that we have two kind of integration layers here, one for master data, one for the data warehouse. In practice, those are often combined, and you have your master and your transactional data flowing through the same database or layer, and it's just fed to different where it needs to go. But the key here is that you do need to differentiate between master data and your transactional data that needs to be fed to your warehouse. So this is a very typical architecture for implementing MDM for a data warehouse. Okay, so this is the last slide, and I did want to review, some of the recommendations that we always try to coach our customers on to make sure that an MDM implementation is successful. First and foremost is active executive sponsorship. This is so important because, as we've been kind of exploring today, the partnership between business and IT is really what makes MDM successful. And in order to do that, you may have an IT-led initiative, and oftentimes, it's difficult to get business buy-in and to get the business engaged with the process. And so in order to facilitate that, you really need an executive sponsor that drives and champions that process. And this isn't as big of an issue when you have a business-led initiative that is supported by IT, but it's still very important. Number two would be focus. MDM implementations are notoriously prone to scope creep, and making sure that you can focus the scope of an initial implementation is incredibly important. You want to avoid implementing multiple domains as a part of a single phase. You want to avoid a centralized architecture, and you also want to avoid major changes to business processes. It's possible, and certainly it's been done before successfully, to do one of these, implement multiple domains, or maybe make a major change to a business process that might require a more centralized architecture. But to do all of them at once is highly risky. So the focus of phase one is very important, and keeping your eyes on the long-term vision is also important, and iteration is key to getting to that long-term vision. So phase one should be foundational in nature, and oftentimes this is exactly how it's done, through the consolidation style hub and supporting a data warehouse, where you build on that foundation to support more advanced use cases. So another key to success is strong project management. again, this is to coordinate all of the different folks, both from the IT side and from the business side, to make sure that everybody is engaged and accountable. And whether or not, it's not as important which methodology you use. It could be Agile, it could be Waterfall. Each have their own strengths and weaknesses. Now, more important is to make sure that everybody is engaged and collaborating as a part of this process, and that the methodology works for the organization. A bottom-up design approach is not what we like to recommend typically, and by that, we mean starting from the technical problem and designing a solution to solve the technical problem. As technicians, you may look at a data set and you might recognize duplicates within that data set and say, well, all we need to do is match these records together, consolidate them, and delete the old records, and we will have accomplished something, right? And we will have solved a pretty major challenge for the business. But we really need to understand, take a step back and understand why the duplicates exist. There may be a very good business reason for those duplicates to be created, and then understand what processes need to be impacted to either prevent the creation of duplicate data or to properly manage that. And so MDM is really most effective when it solves a business problem, not just a technical problem. Solving technical problems is a nice side effect, and it's a good value add. So the last two recipes for success here are data quality and data integration. Everybody's heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out, and I don't think it's any more relevant, that phrase, than when it's applied in the context of MDM. Data quality not only impacts the quality of your matching, right? Making sure you have clean and standardized data will significantly improve your match accuracy. But it's also incredibly important for the business to have confidence in the data that's being produced as a part of the mastering process. And similarly, data integration is crucial to make sure that you're being fed high-quality data that conforms to your business rules and logic, but also if you have any outbound integration, that data integrity is maintained and that you're not negatively impacting any downstream systems through the management and the publication of master data. So those are the recipes for success that we like to review with our customers, and that rounds out the content that we have for today.
Great, thank you, Bryson. Thank you so much. A couple of questions to get things kicked off. So in the examples that we gave today, my impression is that MDM and data warehousing are very complementary, and they can each make each other better, right? Each solution more robust. Are there any scenarios or use cases where the MDM would replace a data warehouse, or is that a common misconception, and is that something that you should never do?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good question, and I think it's the latter, very clearly the latter. An MDM solution will never replace a data warehouse. MDM solutions are not equipped to process transactional data or aggregate data, and that is in a format for BI and reporting applications. And so MDM does, a really good job at the consolidation and governance and stewardship of master data, and a data warehouse is particularly well suited to report on high volumes of transactional data, and that's something that in MDM Hub, at least with the technology that's available today, is not capable of, and I don't foresee that in the future either.
Okay,
Yeah.
Very good. Something that we're seeing really common today in the field is companies are taking their legacy data warehouses and they're trying to modernize them. And a lot of those modernization components have a cloud piece associated with them, right? Maybe it's moving the data warehouse completely to the cloud, or maybe it's a blended onshore, on-prem versus in the cloud. Any additional considerations if your MDM has to work with a data warehouse that is in the cloud?
Yeah, another good question. And, from an architecture perspective, I would say no. However, the product that you choose, if you do decide to purchase an MDM solution, might come into the picture there. There are both cloud and on-prem solutions for master data management. Some cloud solutions are multi-tenant, some are not, some are just hosted in AWS, for example. But if your corporate strategy is to move towards a more cloud-centric infrastructure, then that may play into which solution you choose for mastering your data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. What is the scope of machine learning or AI in the MDM when you're creating a golden record?
Another very good question. Right now vendors are exploring that space, and currently it's pretty limited. The amount of machine learning and AI that's put into the consolidation of the matching process, or even the survivorship process. There are vendors that are exploring ways to analyze data sets and suggest match rules based on the patterns that they see within that data set. But in terms of actually having a self-learning or self-improving algorithm that will improve the quality of matches over time, there are no solutions in the market today that do that. Potentially something we could see in the future.
Okay, great. I know it's all the buzz, and quite honestly, a year or two ago, it seemed more like vaporware, but now it's really coming to fruition. These types of solutions, AI and machine learning, they're actually happening. So very exciting.
Absolutely.
You had mentioned in your final slide about approaches to success, how critical having business value associated with the solution. Can you talk a little bit about, from your experience, some of the business problems that MDM has solved?
Of course, yeah. I guess the high-level categories of this would be, one, application modernization, right? So a lot of companies will look at MDM as a means to an end for upgrading their platforms. They may have multiple legacy systems that they want to retire, and again, they have the problem of storing duplicate data either within or across the systems, and they need a way to basically produce a high-quality, I'll call it a seed, right? Seed data for their new application, and so they'll use MDM to process and consolidate that data and use it to initially populate their new application. So application consolidation and modernization is a big driving force. And then I'd also say that master data management is, I'll call out two more. So the second one would be the use case that we reviewed today, right? Where master data has the ability to consolidate records both within and across applications, and that gives you the ability to roll up transactions in your warehouse and drive insights that you may not have before. A good example of that might be that you do business in multiple segments or lines of business within your organization with a company like Walmart, for example, and you have no way to attribute the revenue from one part of your organization to another part of the organization, and recognize that Walmart, if you do 5 million in organization A and 10 million in organization B, you have no way to recognize that you actually, as a company, do $15 million worth of business with Walmart. And Walmart's probably a bad example because everybody knows Walmart. That's probably pretty well known, but you get the idea. And so that kind of the insights that it drives is a really strong business case as well. And then the last use case that I'll mention would be kind of customer centricity. That's a big one these days. Driving a 360-degree view of your customers. So, when a customer calls into your call center and they say, I'm having trouble with a hotel reservation, being able to see all the different aspects of that customer from their previous reservations to, maybe their activity on their website, right? Being able to link all of this transactional data and correlate it so that you have a full 360-degree view of a customer and their preferences so that you can better serve the customer and improve customer satisfaction. So that would be a third one I'd call out.
Okay, great. Good examples. I like applying it to the what's happening in real life, so that's helpful. What kind of manual data steward tasks are valuable in your opinion? As you had mentioned, manual factor must be involved.
Right. Yeah, and that's another great question. I probably should have included that in my presentation somewhere. But I guess the fundamental manual intervention that is extremely common in MDM is just evaluating low confidence matches. So as a part of the matching process, you may say, yeah, these two people are definitely the same. And you might say, well, this third guy kind of looks the same, but we're not very confident that we should be merging this record with the other two. So often there is a manual review process that will make a decision one way or another. Should this be matched or should it not be matched? So that's one piece of manual intervention. And then I'd say kind of the flip side of that, again, another very common manual stewardship task that is associated with MDM is resolving what we refer to as under matches and over matches. So under matching would be when two records are really the same, but we don't identify those as a match with our automated process. So a steward might come in and say, hey, these two are actually the same, and manually merge those records. So that would be another piece of manual stewardship. And then the flip side of that is overmatching, where we might match two records together that are really not the same person, right? They don't belong together, so we need to unmerge or split those two records that may have been consolidated incorrectly. So those are some of the fundamental manual stewardship tasks that are a part of almost all MDM implementations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, very good. And obviously there's a flavor of data governance that runs through MDM. Can you talk a little bit about how critical an MDM process is to a successful MDM solution?
Yeah, it's key, and I hope I emphasized that sufficiently throughout the presentation. It's absolutely critical, making sure that the right individuals or groups within a company have accountability and a responsibility for maintaining master data is crucial, because your master data is establishing the clear ownership and responsibility and processes for maintaining the data has a significant and a direct impact on the quality of the data and the value that you get from that data. Treating master data as an asset and making sure that you have people who are actively incentivized to manage it is incredibly important, because if you have low quality master data, it's not going to be a very valuable asset to your organization.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, and then this next question, it's really part two to not the last question, but the question before that around data steward tasks. Mm-hmm. Do you find that the data steward, any role in data quality or in the feedback loop back to the source system?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. On the data quality piece, absolutely. Yeah, as a part of an MDM implementation, data quality is fundamental, and what you'll often find is a pattern where you will, cleanse data as it is being ingested into the MDM hub. You'll identify any exceptions or anomalies, And you'll have reports or queues or workflows for stewards to go through to manually remediate that data. And so, the second part of your question, how does that interact with the flow back to the source systems? That would come in a more coexistence or centralized style of MDM. And if you do publish that data back to the sources, stewards might be empowered to remediate that data centrally in the MDM hub, and that data is automatically published back to the sources. Now, the other approach to that is if you don't have that integration in place, is that you may identify the issues and then you go back into the source systems to remediate the data there. So kind of different approaches to remediating data quality issues, but still a manual task.
Okay, great. It's super helpful. One more question and then we'll wrap things up. And this one's more of a personal question for me. Like when you were on the slide and you were talking about the conformed dimension versus the golden record.
Right.
Just for me, Bryson, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so the connection between the two, at the end of the day, they're really talking about a process of consolidation, right? And that's kind of the heart of what a golden record accomplishes, producing that single version of the truth from multiple, maybe conflicting views of the truth, that consolidation process. And similarly for the conformed dimension, it's a process of consolidating multiple records in your dimensional data to a standard format, and of course identifying that they're the same. So they both refer to a process of consolidation.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, helpful.
Yeah.
For our listeners, I apologize if people grasped that the first time, but I thought, maybe there's someone out there that has the same question, so I thought I'd put it out there. Okay, so with that, we're going to wrap things up. A lot of times we get the question, will this deck be made available? This session has been recorded, like all of our educational webinars, and so that will be posted on our website, datasourceconsulting.com. But before we close it out, we do want to, queue up the next educational session that we'll be hosting. And this is going to be right in the same genre of what we presented today. So it's going to be about mastering provider data for payers in healthcare. And, as some of you may or may not know, 3 of the big benefits to an MDM solution around provider is, 1, it reduces regulatory risk. There's a CMS audit that takes place for payers, and it's important to pass that and have good results. Number 2, MDM for provider helps enhance care delivery and coordination and access across organizations and for their members. And number 3, it improves member satisfaction, retention, and growth. As the healthcare industry becomes more competitive, this is going to become more and more of a factor. So that will be held Thursday, May 10th at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So hopefully you'll tune in for that as well. In addition to that, we have our data storytelling part 2, right? Allison, when is that?
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, the 24th. So we've got a jam-packed educational series coming up for you. And if you missed part 1 of data storytelling, go to our website, listen to that, and then you can tune in for part 2. We have a guest speaker, Jed Somerton, a long-term executive here in Colorado and really in other parts of the country. He's been doing this kind of work for a long time and teaches at Daniel's School of Business here at Denver University. So that will be coming up as well. So with that, I know people have to get on to their next meetings at the top of the hour. So thank you again so much. And Bryson, thank you so much. It was great. I even though I've heard this a couple times, I still continue to take notes. So it's been great.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.